There's a guy named Kleinsmith who eventually alters an email from the CIA to the Department of Justice and FBI. And Mr. Horowitz's and team found this out, and how they did it, I will never know. I'm jumping ahead here. And the day of reckoning is here.
One of the more intriguing things to come out of the IG Michael Horowitz testimony today, to me, was in the area of Carter Page. I have been digging and trying to figure out this for myself, and I have still not 100% figured it all out. I am sure that it is by design, and I am also sure that we will find out. Let me show you what I have, and I'll share it with you. The FBI's 4 wiretap affidavits to a federal judge in 2016 and 2017 deliberately hid a part of the Trump campaign volunteer Carter Page's professional life that would have been revealed his patriotic role as a CIA informant instead of the Bureau's nefarious depiction of him. The Justice Department Inspector General's report shows this. The 476-page history of how the FBI targeted the Trump campaign contains over a dozen instances in which the FBI violated its own rules and procedures by including inaccuracies in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the applications, by omitting exculpatory evidence. Perhaps no one was more damaging than the actions of the FBI attorney, Kevin Kleinsmith, who was noted as FBI lawyer number 2 in the IG report, and whose social media posts reveal a deep dislike of President Trump. Now, it is important to note that it's not the first time that Kleinsmith's name has surfaced in connection with possible anti-Trump bias. In 2018, GOP Congressman Mark Meadows publicly accused Kleinsmith of possibly being an FBI lawyer that was described in the Inspector General's earlier report into the Clinton email investigation as writing anti-Trump messages, including one that declared "Viva la Resistance." The Times confirmed on November 22nd of 2019 that Kleinsmith wrote those texts, saying that Horowitz's 2018 report identified him as FBI attorney number 2. During the drafting of the FISA warrants in 2016 and 2017, the CIA confirmed to the FBI that Mr. Page, a Naval Academy graduate and energy investor who joined the Trump campaign as an advisor, served as an informant from 2008 to 2013 with the CIA. And that biographical fact never made it into any affidavit. In 2017, the CIA sent an email to the FBI restating that Mr. Page had been an asset. Mr. Kleinsmith, who was not named in the Inspector General's original report, altered the email to say Mr. Page was not an asset. Mr. Kleinsmith took an email from an official, which was a CIA employee, at another federal agency that contained several factual assertions, then added material to the bottom that looked like another assertion from the email's author. Mr. Kleinsmith included this altered email in a package that he compiled for another FBI official to read in preparation for signing an affidavit. Additionally, Mr. Kleinsmith worked on both Hillary Clinton email investigation and the Russia investigation. He was among the FBI officials removed by Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III after Mr. Horowitz found text messages expressing political animus against President Trump. Senator Lindsey Graham, South Carolina Republican, outed Mr. Kleinsmith on Wednesday during the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing with the Justice Department Inspector General Michael E. Horowitz. Mr. Graham gave his theory about why Mr. Kleinsmith lied. "What does that matter?" Mr. Graham said. "Because if the court had known, then there's a lawful reason for Mr. Page to be talking to the Russian guy. He wasn't working against his country, he was working with his country, which undercuts the idea he is a foreign agent. That's why Kleinsmith lied, because he didn't want to stop this investigation." And right there is a very key point. What was the driving force behind Kleinsmith lying? I mean, if you're doing an honest investigation, even with a team of people, why would you fabricate evidence to keep doing something? Could this be bias? Well, we know Kleinsmith would never admit to that.
There's a guy named Kleinsmith who eventually alters an email from the CIA to the Department of Justice and FBI. And Mr. Horowitz's team found this out, and how they did it, I will never know. I'm jumping ahead here. But when you read this report, what they find is that a lawyer supervising the FISA process at the FBI, according to Mr. Horowitz, doctored an email from the CIA to the FBI, and he's going to be referred for criminal prosecution. Why is that important? Carter Page, who's been on the receiving end of all this, the foundation to believe he was a foreign agent comes from a dossier that we'll talk about in a minute. In that dossier provided by Christopher Steele, and we'll talk about him in a minute, they claim that Carter Page meets with 3 people known to be Russians, Russian agents, people associated with Russia. Carter Page, while being wiretapped by his government, says, "I don't know 2 of these people," and to this day, there is no proof that he ever met 2 of those 3. The 3rd person, he says, "Yeah, I met him. I told the CIA about my meeting because I was a source for the CIA." So they would have you believe that Carter Page is working against our government, not with our government. So Carter Page in the summer of 2017 is trying to tell anybody and everybody, "I was working with the CIA, I reported my contact with this person," and nobody believed him. The CIA had told the FBI it was true earlier, but it never made it through the system. Somebody got so rattled at the FBI, they asked Mr. Kleinsmith to check it out. He checks it out. He communicates with the CIA. "Is Carter Page a source for you?" In an email exchange, they say, "Yes, he is." What does Mr. Kleinsmith do? He alters the email to say, "No, he's not." And you caught him. I don't know how you caught him, because you got to dig into this email chain. It would be like getting a lab report from the FBI. The fingerprints don't match, and the agent says they do. That's how bad this is. So now let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Kleinsmith, if I can find it. Can you get me the Kleinsmith stuff? All right, this is the lawyer supervising the FISA warrant process. The guy that altered this CIA email because he didn't want the court to know that Carter Page actually was the source. And why does that matter? Because if the court had known, then there's a lawful reason for Mr. Page to be talking to the Russian guy. He wasn't working against his country, he was working with his country, which undercuts the idea he's a foreign agent. That's why Kleinsmith lied, because he didn't want to stop this investigation. That's why Kleinsmith lied, because he didn't want to stop this investigation. That's why Kleinsmith lied, because he didn't want to stop this investigation.
So now to understand how Mr. Kleinsmith's deception harmed Mr. Page. Now the story starts back in New York, back in 2013. The future Trump associate ran his own energy investment firm and was looking for opportunities in the oil and gas-rich Russia. He lived in Moscow in the mid-2000s while working as a Merrill Lynch banker, and at that point apparently became a CIA source. Now, while in New York, Page met a Victor Podny at an energy conference in January of 2013. This is where the story gets kind of interesting. Mr. Page was working for the U.S. intelligence, but had been inactive for over a year. Now, Moscow posted Mr. Podny as a United Nations diplomat, but he actually was a spy for the SVR, basically the Russian version of the CIA. Now, Mr. Podny and two other countrymen were running an espionage ring, and they tried to recruit Mr. Page, as Mr. Page was looking for help in making money via the Russian energy. Now, Mr. Podny, whose calls were intercepted by the FBI according to a Justice Department filing in 2015, played along with Mr. Page's desires to find a business deal in Russia involving energy. The recruitment ended in June 2013 when FBI agents interviewed Mr. Page, who was identified as Male 1 in court documents. One of the three Russian spies was convicted of espionage. Mr. Podny and a comrade had left the U.S. by the time the government had filed its charges. Mr. Page cooperated. He was never charged. Fast forward to the fall of 2016, when the FBI and its Crossfire Hurricane team were drafting what would be the first 4 FISA warrants that would allow the government to electronically spy on Mr. Page for a year. Agents also could monitor his activities for the campaign. Emails, texts, and documents would all be in play, all part of the metadata collection. Included in all 4 warrant applications was Mr. Page's contact with Mr. Podny. The Justice Department released the heavily redacted application in 2018 under extreme pressure from Representative Devin Nunes, a real star in all of this, a California Republican who then led the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Mr. Nunes accused the FBI of violating its own FISA rules. The Inspector General report released Monday just now supported his 2-year-old allegations. If you remember, a couple of years ago, he raced over the White House and it all blew up into the news. And one of the biggest opponents publicly and a mouthpiece against it all was none other than Adam Schiff. Now back to the altered document. Now by September of 2016, the FBI was finishing the first warrant on Mr. Page. Its prime piece of evidence was now discredited, the Christopher Steele dossier, sourced to the Kremlin and financed by the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, and Hillary Clinton, a presidential campaign and an opponent to Trump. Now, an FBI attorney for the Office of the Intelligence asked whether Mr. Page, as he claimed, had worked for another intelligence agency. A Crossfire Hurricane agent said that perhaps briefly when he lived in Moscow. Based on that response, the attorney did not include the part of Mr. Page's biography. The agent's information was inaccurate, a lie, a hidden truth. On August 17th of 2016, the memo from the CIA, the Inspector General's report, describes it as simply another agency, said Mr. Page had been approved as an operational contact. When agents interviewed Mr. Page back in 2013, he told them he had been a CIA source for years. The FBI included none of this in the FISA applications, as it should have been, the Inspector General said. When news leaked in June 2017 that the FBI had bugged Mr. Page, he went public to deny the Steele dossier's allegations against him. He also said he had been a U.S. Service Intelligence source. At that point, Mr. Kleinsmith identified in the Inspector General's report as the FBI's Office of General Counsel, or OGC, attorney sent an email to the CIA asking for this confirmation. And here's the funny way that the CIA answered that exact question right back, that the FBI should review its own August 2016 memorandum and that Mr. Page did indeed have a working relationship with them. Here is where Mr. Kleinsmith's skullduggery occurred. According to the Inspector General, the OGC attorney told the FISA agent that Page had never had a relationship with any other U.S. government agency. In addition, the OGC attorney altered the email that the other U.S. government agency had sent to the OGC attorney, so that the email stated that Page had not been a source for any other agency. The OGC attorney then forwarded the altered email to the FISA agent, who told us he relied on the email. Afterward, the agent completed the last of the 4 3-month FISA warrants without including Mr. Page's CIA work. The Office of Intelligence Attorney told the Inspector General it would have been a significant fact if Page had a relationship with any other U.S. government agency that overlapped in his time with his interactions with known Russian intelligence officers described in the FISA applications, because it would raise the issue of whether Page interacted with the Russian intelligence officers at the behest of other agency or with the intent to assist the U.S. government. Now, the New York Times reported that Mr. Kleinsmith is under a criminal investigation by John Durham, the U.S. Attorney from Connecticut, and along with Attorney General William P. Barr, he had named Mr. Durham to investigate the origins of the FBI Russia probe. Mr. Barr told NBC News on Tuesday that he disagrees with Mr. Horowitz's conclusion that the investigation into the Trump campaign was justified. Mr. Kleinsmith moved from the FBI Office of General Counsel to Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe. He was then reassigned in 2018 after Mr. Horowitz discovered the document doctoring. Mr. Meadows identified Mr. Kleinsmith as one of the FBI employees who bashed Mr. Trump in instant messages, also captured in the Horowitz report on the Clinton email investigation. Mr. Kleinsmith messaged me after Trump won the election. I just can't imagine the systematic assembly of the progress we've made over the last 8 years. ACA is gone. Who knows if the rhetoric about deporting people, walls, and all that crap is true. I honestly feel like there's going to be a lot more gun issues too. The crazies finally won. This is a Tea Party on steroids, and the GOP is going to be lost. They have to deal with an incumbent for the next 4 years. We have to fight this again. And also, Pence is stupid. Making a reference to his own role in Crossfire Hurricane, Mr. Kleinsmith said, quote, "Plus, my goddamn name is all over the legal documents investigating his staff." Mr. Kleinsmith also said his personal political beliefs didn't affect the way he investigated Trump campaign. Not at all. That's why he altered a couple of emails. So in the last 48 hours, a lot has been answered for me personally in this whole Carter Page and the mystery surrounding. Now, again, we had Papadopoulos and other people that we know this was kind of going on with. This is just one story. This is just what IG Michael Horowitz looked into. This one compartmented angle and whether there's any bias or any of this. And you've kind of seen that transpire over the last few days in the words used by both political parties and even by the people themselves embedded into the investigation. Okay, now we're going to wrap this whole thing up. And this is where it all leads. This is very important for you to remember going forward. We got to keep in mind that IG Horowitz has limited scope of any investigation, and it's more of an FBI looking at the FBI. He's the one that has all the process and the rules that the FBI are supposed to follow. Anytime there's a report of any kind of wrongdoing, the IG should be called in first to take a look. And you can have other investigations on top of that, but to be formal And to be thorough, you'd want the IG, whoever that is. Now, if you put into the timeline that Durham came on board in October of 17, he also jumped on board with shadowing Horowitz in April. And Horowitz has been giving us tons of IG reports, one that pertained to the summer of 2018 over Comey and Rod Rosenstein, and charges were recommended, but Barr refused. Or do we see something else here? We know we have the IG doing his inner office, can't leave the building interviews, getting the story out of these people's mouths as they want to tell it. And then he cross-references that with protocol, and anytime he sees something wrong or an email land over here that gets changed, he writes that down. Charges sometimes recommended. Then you have Durham doing a more thorough outside of the office and the other angles. See, we know that this all leads for Horowitz and the scope of what he could look into out of the building with an incoming transmission from the Australian government. We now know that Durham and Barr are in charge. The Durham probe is now a criminal probe. James Comey has done more damage to the FBI than J. Edgar Hoover ever thought of. Ray has a huge job ahead of him. I hope he's up for the task. These people, they lied, they cheated, they got caught. Comey's been lying. He's been on a media press corps selling books, making up his own version of this show all along the way. He is arrogant and just wrong. I think he writes his own books, reads them, and then cites them as fact. He insults all of our intelligence. The IG findings on Comey's era of his legacy is a disgrace set in stone forevermore. So to wrap this up in a nutshell, you have Barr kind of talking with Durham, who is overseeing Horowitz, and they're collecting all this data. They're not getting any little charges for Comey or anyone along the way yet until they get to the very end, which takes them out of the office overseas to the Australian government. This is why they've been working overseas, because we know that before they started all this FISA stuff to look legal, this was the insurance plan, folks. Right here in this queue, it tells us Page was a plant. But I believe Carter Page played a bigger role. He was working for the CIA. Maybe they told him to stay engaged, to collect everything he could. I mean, he screamed out that he worked for the CIA. The FBI had it in their own files in 2013 from a case that they mistakenly tried to charge him in. And then the lawyer even emailed directly to the CIA. They emailed back, and they told them to look in your own paperwork, but yes, he does. And they still refused to put it in there. You think that guy orchestrated all that himself, just this low-level, mid-level, high-level lawyer? Heck no. He had gotten an order to do so. And this takes them overseas. Never tread on me. The biggest cover-up in the U.S. history attempted. You can see where this has been heading all this time now, and it is nearing the end. Never forget that then Director James Comey has been fired, and then Associate Deputy Director David Bodwith, who later replaced Andrew McCabe as Deputy Director, Michael Steinbeck, the FBI's former Executive Assistant Director for National Security, then Assistant Director of Counterintelligence, E.W. Prestrap, now retired, James Rybecki, former Chief of Staff to Comey, FBI Intelligence Analyst Jonathan Moffa, former Acting Assistant Director Jason Bing Herring, Michael Cortan, FBI Assistant Director for Public Affairs, former Principal Deputy Director General Counsel Tricia Anderson, Stroke and Page. And all I can say to all these firings and removal of power just within the FBI and DOJ in these areas, not to count the countless people that have left the intelligence agencies, the minute Trump won. Why? And why haven't you heard a lot about that? Well, these are some of the smartest people. They work with the systems and the computers and the intelligence, and they knew the minute they lost, the cat was out of the bag. They left. They went home. They've been very quiet, while some of these other idiots have yelled and been really loud and trying to change the narrative, steer the ship. Just hope and pray that they can get Trump out of the office, impeached, so they can regain control and make all this go away, sweep it under the rug. We understand that there is extreme fatigue and frustration regarding the wheels of justice and how slow they really do move, especially within the government. When I was in the military, there was an old saying, hurry up and wait. Exclude emotion and personal desires. Instead, use logic and critical thinking based on situational awareness. How long does it take to undo a lifetime of evil and corruption and infestation in the span of less than 3 years, with the corrupt DOJ and FBI in place as well? This has been process and planning of law and order to the highest levels and elevated power. How do you inflict military intelligence takeover over the other 3-letter agencies? A military operation at its finest. I am Michael. This is the Patriot Hour. God bless, Godspeed to each and every one of you. I hope this helps make an understanding of where we're headed and where we've been and what's to come. Again, we'll see you on the next video. Make sure you are subscribed and take a look in the description box. Thank you so much.
I don't think that was how love was supposed to be. Day in and day out, not sure if you notice me. Nowadays I don't let nobody close to me, 'cause you took my best poetry. I don't think that was how love was supposed to be.